Welcome, another edition of the Boss It podcast. Well, this morning, I'm going to be talking to Thom Dennis from Serenity in Leadership. Got a very diverse and interesting background. I've just been having a conversation with him just now, and hopefully some of that will come out as we discuss further. Good morning, Thom. Thank you for coming on to Boss It, and tell us a little bit of background about yourself. What's your elevator pitch?
Good morning, Mark, and thank you for having me on your show. Essentially, what I do now is help organizations become safer for the people that work there. And I'm not talking about health and safety. I'm talking about psychological safety. And really, I'm motivated by the thought that leaders sometimes don't realize just how much power they have over the people, not just that they employ, but the impact that they have on a wider scale. And what really activates me is helping them really understand the implications of the decisions that they make so that they can really take responsibility for them. So it's the impact on their people and the impact on the wider society. And of course, today, very much on the ecology of the whole system. So in the old days, I used to talk about bringing healing into business, because I think there's a lot of very dysfunctional organizations out there which are led by really well-meaning, motivated, dynamic people who are making decisions that they don't quite understand the impact. And so I like to help them see that.
Do you think there's such a thing as a natural leader?
Yes, I do. I think some people have more charisma. They're more outgoing. And I mean, you only need to look at school. That there are certain characters that naturally form groups.
Yes.
People gravitate to them. And of course, the other side of that is that people can learn how to lead as well.
Do you think that there are also successful executives running companies that are successful but are not great leaders?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And often that's what they do, is they create an atmosphere where people feel very uncomfortable, but for whatever reason, they stay there. So a lot of organizational cultures, I think, are very characterized by fear. And that's incredibly unhealthy. But you only have to look at the likes of, Lee Iacocca and in the 90s, for instance, we were really celebrating all these really heavy driving leaders who were leaving just damaged people all around them. I mean, Lee Iacocca, I remember there were stories of him with his senior management team, and there were sort of experienced grown men in tears because of the way they'd been treated. And it's like, well, yeah, you will achieve some results doing that, but there's a better way. There's a better way.
Do you think, I remember those days in the 90s, and I was in a couple of those companies where it was almost a badge of honor that there was this sort of tough management style. Do you think that still exists today?
Yes, in some places. I think, having worked with a lot of American organizations, for example, when they come over to Europe, they can't believe that they can't just fire someone like that.
Yes.
That there is negotiation. And I remember working with a French company where we had to work with the leadership team for a year while they worked out how to deal with an acquisition, which was actually going to close that part of the business down. And the frustration coming from across the Atlantic was intense. So I think because it's so much easier in places like the US, it's not just the US. I think that that there are very damaged people as a result of organizations that are still being run by people who essentially just want to make a bunch of money. And if they're sharp and they're good operators, they'll do that. They will make a bunch of money. But I just think we've got to be more conscious of the human cost of that.
Yeah.
And also, actually, if you create an environment where people love working there,
Well, yes.
creativity and
Yeah.
innovation and all sorts
Yeah.
of things blossom.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember working with one CEO, and his ambition was to work 20 hours a week. That was it. And the rest of the time, he really enjoyed playing golf. So what he did was to coach his executive team so that they were empowered to run the business in a really healthy way. And it worked. It worked.
Fantastic. I mean, that brings me to a phrase that I saw when I was looking at the website, your business website, which is "businesses thrive when people thrive." I really like that. That really resonated with me. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I kind of said it. I mean, one of the models that I love is Patagonia, the outdoor clothing organization, which was created by someone, Yvon Chouinard, who just cared about the environment, actually. And he was a climber, and he used to make pitons, and they hammer them into the rock face, and he could see it was damaging the climb for the next person.
Mm.
He wanted to create pitons that were much more, if you like, environmentally friendly. And he just gathered around him people who were passionate about climbing, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And now, what is it? It's around a $2.2 billion organization where they've been running sufficiently long now, where they have children's creches and special spaces where women can nurse, and all this kind of thing, and they've got people working for the company who went through the crash,
Yes.
and so they're a self-generating organization of passionate people who love what they're doing and really care about the impact they have on society and the environment. They give 10% of their is it 10%? I think it is. Of their income to Patagonia, the actual the country in Argentina, and they care. They just everything. So even they look at their suppliers, and they realize, because they adopted organic cotton and made clothing out of that.
Yes.
And then they started to say, well, hang on a minute, let's look at our suppliers. How are they operating? Because organic cotton takes a huge use of water, as I understand it. And so they started to then say, listen, we need suppliers who are as responsible as we are, and putting much higher demands on the ethics of their suppliers. Now, if you go on their websites, you can see all of this. They're completely transparent. So, and that's one thing, organizations thrive when people thrive. Transparency leads to a lot of that. And people being empowered. And I mean, I've got on one of my podcasts, I interview the ex-HR head of Patagonia, Dean Carter, and he tells some stories there about they just had some shorts where I can't remember the wording. I think the label, the whoever was putting these shorts together put a label in the short that said "Vote out the arseholes." I think that was the wording, and they didn't ask for permission. But I mean, it got into the press, and they just sold thousands of these shorts. It's and in their CEO at the time and one other were arrested for being in a protest march, supporting the environment, and the company just bailed them out. And that it's like that when you have an organization where the people really believe in what they're doing. We talk about purpose. I was talking about purpose yesterday, and young people, I think, far more than the older generations, are now coming into the workplace and saying, I want to work for an organization that I can believe in.
Yes.
It isn't just about making money.
Yes.
And so if they can feel that they can really bring their heart to work,
Mm.
then you'll get so much more out of them.
Yes, yes. I've experienced in the past, and I think perhaps fortunately less so now, the approach of senior executives who will behave in one way in their personal life, but when it comes to business, they will behave in a way that they don't believe is right in their personal life. But they have the excuse of, but this is business, and morally, it was wrong, but they believe that in some way they get a free pass because it's business and it's about making money and it's profit. They only saw it as one way. And I think that's a very blink. And what we're now seeing is highly successful that are having a much more embracing way of working and nurturing the people that are part of that organization and getting paid back in benefits by seeing those people thrive and be able to add more value and to be able to drive greater success, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. And that way, in that environment, you find organizations which are much more inclusive.
Mm.
You look at people with ADHD or some facet of themselves, so they end up being labeled as disabled. There's a whole conversation one could have about that. But I remember sort of peripherally being involved in a business that was in Colorado, and the guy set it up, and he just wanted people with ADHD because what they were doing was taking old electronic things. I think they were mostly old radios and stuff like that.
Oh,
they needed people to take them apart and save the bits that were worthwhile and get rid of all the rest. And there were people who just loved, give them a tight brief and give them an environment where they feel safe, and they just went for it.
yes.
So yeah, it's horses for courses, as they say. I think leaders, a clever leader, a sharp leader, will surround themselves with people who are not like them.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that.
And yet, you see lots of organizations. I remember working with an organization years ago where it was taken over by an accountancy company, and they came in and they fired everybody who didn't look like them. So there were
Yes.
a ton of people who could do the numbers, and there was nobody creative, nobody innovative, blah, blah, blah. And 9 months later, the company went down, and they were all surprised.
Yes. I seem to remember very vaguely a quote by Peter Drucker, who was saying that one of the biggest mistakes is that people hire somebody who is a lesser version of themselves. And the result of that is that you end up with a company of dwarves, which was actually quite a nice idea, but I can understand how that can happen.
Yeah, because the leader doesn't want to be threatened in that case
Yes.
by anybody. So I think it's really interesting looking at C-suites at the moment, and well, at the moment I think it's often the way where they look down at all these young and thrusting people coming up, and they look at them and they say, "My God, I'm not as good as that." And if I had to undergo all the tests and everything that we demand of them, I'd never pass. So keep them back.
Yes.
I don't want them too close to me because I'll be shown up.
That's managing through fear, isn't it? Whereas they should embrace that and think that it makes the organization as a whole, the team, stronger. You want people that are stronger than you in different areas, and then allow them to do their job.
And for that, you have to manage your ego. And not
yes.
everybody's very good at that.
Oh, my favorite subject when it comes to companies and egos. It's one of the biggest killers I've seen time and time again. Egos get in the way, where people end up defending an idea because they feel that to allow that idea to be attacked and challenged, it's attacking them. And it's not. It is just merely a thought that's passed through your head. Big egos cause big problems. You were in the Marines for 17 years. What are the key lessons you learned from that time?
Don't trust politicians.
We've all learned that lesson now, I'm afraid.
Boy, I mean, that's why I resigned, was I fell out with a minister when I was working in the Ministry of Defense.
Right.
I think the best leaders I've ever met, and a lot of them were in the Marines, not all. I've met some pretty great leaders afterwards, but I think they were all characterized by humility,
mm,
and an openness to listen to others. I think that something that the military do extremely well is rehearse.
mm,
And I remember working with a pharmaceutical, and they were they had compound teams that had to go to organizations like the FDA and in Europe, each country, and try and persuade them to have a license, And we used to rehearse, and it was very common and they did it that way. But an awful lot of organizations, you just jump into things, whereas actually taking the time to say, right, let's all get together and work this out. If we've got to give a presentation, how much have we rehearsed for it? So I think that's something. And I remember, in the Falklands, there's a very good friend of mine who was the guy who was responsible for the landing plan, the whole thing. And he said to me, because we'd rehearsed this kind of operation so much, we knew pretty much what needed to happen. And then, so all we had to do was to tweak the plans, as opposed to just sit there and scratch our head, rather as the British government did with the pandemic, where in fact they threw out all the rehearsed plans, ignored them, and just said, "Oh well, we'll deal with it," which of course they didn't. So, and I put that down. The word I use for that is professionalism.
Yes, I understand that. Yes, I mean that it is also about the leader being able to get the best from his team that are coming together to solve a problem, and that's about facilitation, which I know that is one of the things that you're very hot upon. I did a previous podcast actually not that long ago, and he said a line which was, great leaders want to be able to bring to the service the best ideas, which doesn't mean it's their idea. It's just the best idea. It doesn't matter where it comes from. How do you do that in your facilitation?
Well, it's preparing the ground. So, if you want to get the best ideas from a group of people, your team, then you've got to create a space where it's safe for them to propound that. And I think that
safe to make mistakes.
Well, yes. I mean, that's one of the things that a facilitator will do, is to work with the leader to say, right, what are the objectives of this, let's say, this offsite? And often the leader isn't that clear. So we work with them to really clarify their mind. And then the facilitator can essentially chair the meeting. That's the way that I do it, which allows then the leader to be part of the process. But in every team, you'll have some extroverts and you'll have some introverts. And just because they're introvert, it doesn't mean to say that anything they have has less value. No. But what you have to do is to create a safe space where, sometimes you've got to say to the extrovert, "That's great, thank you, really heard you, and now I'd like to hear from Joe, who and we've got to honor the different people's styles." Sometimes someone will not actually be very comfortable speaking in a larger group. So, all right, break them down, put them into smaller groups, and enable there to be a full exploration, for instance. Or indeed, I mean, in some offsites I've run, I've worked with the CEO, and we've given them scenarios to work through, and some of them can be very uncomfortable. But they work through these scenarios, and then they report back to the larger group, and the larger group then sort of can give some feedback. And yes, that was a really great idea, and it won't work there, but that makes me think of this. So you're getting this sparking off each other, and it can be an incredibly creative process. Now, without a facilitator, that kind of thing is very difficult to do, because people get very scared of making a fool of themselves, or saying something that just sounds silly. But it's just, it's like their intuition is saying, I've got to say it. I need to say this. not quite sure why. And then someone else hears that and says, well, actually, that's not as silly as it sounds because da 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 da.
Yes.
So I love that co-creation. It's great.
That's a really interesting point. Actually, it's about intuition. I'm as I've got older, I've sort of changed my opinion about intuition. Not that I had something against it, but I think it can be a very powerful thing. I'm also a believer in getting into which are quite a famous psychologist who did a study about high achieving individuals that were able to perform not just a bit better, but significantly better, the best in their area. And when he studied them in all different sorts of areas and skills, he saw that there was a commonality in the way that they worked. And he called this flow. Michele Csikszentmihalyi was a psychologist back in the 1970s. And I'd experienced that in sport and I'd occasionally experienced in business, but I didn't really understand what was happening. And the more I understood, the more you can be able to create that. But the part of that, I believe, is that then you enable, because you're in that relaxed state, you trust your intuition. You trust what's going on in your subconscious. How do you help get more of that intuition come forth into those meetings? Because quite often that can be where the real diamonds, the real value is. Somebody who has lots of experience, they may not know why, but they have this intuition that this is the right answer.
Yeah. Yeah, Mark. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we come into these meetings and sometimes it can be a bit scary because you've got all these people in a room and you think that this is a lot of salary, right?
Yes. Yes.
And there might be hotels, there might have been flights. All of a sudden this is a lot of expense. So people sit there and say, come on, let's get to it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Where's the agenda? What's number one? How long?
And I tend to plan these things in detail, but then I like to be able to go off piste, and I like to work in circle.
Yes.
So there's no desks separating anybody, and I like to start with a check-in. I encourage people just to say what they're bringing into the room, because you might find that somebody their wife is due expecting, so they really need to have their phone on. You might have somebody who was just driving to the venue and someone cut them up and they're still kind of shaken by that. So it's like, how present can you all be? And it just that process tends to quieten people. And it's like meditation, when you sit down to meditate and you've got all these blah 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 blah, I've got to do this and I forgot about that and what am I going to do for this, and you've got to allow all that to settle, and what that does is naturally create a much more creative space, and some people they live in resistance of that because they're just so busy all the time. But my organization is called Serenity in Leadership, and it is about creating that space of serenity, because I remember driving around the M25 one day and I was in a hurry, and before I'd left the house there was this thought and I kind of ignored it and I rushed to the car and I was driving, and then all of a sudden the thought crystallized, I've forgotten my notebook. And I thought, oh, for God's sake. And then it's, do I turn around because it's going to make me really, really late? And then I was thinking, I did hear that voice, but it was so soft.
Yes.
And I was shouting in the car, speak louder because I can't hear you.
Yes.
And of course it's not that. It's create the silence or the ability to hear that small voice. And I think when I'm coaching with CEOs, I often say, what are those still small voices saying in the organization? What is it that you can actually, if you quieten down, you can see or hear that you're ignoring, and these things could really make a big difference.
Yes. Yeah, I think that it's very common for people to be caught up in people's own thinking, in the voices that's going on in their head, and not be present at that moment and listening, or to be calm, to be relaxed. They're thinking about the past or they're thinking about the future, and actually you're here now at that moment. Funny you say that, because I was thinking just yesterday, and this is in a business environment. There's somebody that we were dealing with on an outsourced basis that I spent some time giving him a presentation about the project. And as I was presenting to him, we were on a Zoom call, and I could see he was checking his phone and he was checking his laptop. And I was going through, and I was in two minds to actually say to him, and I thought, well, it's probably a bit rude to say that, to listen to me, if you like. But there were important things within that presentation that I wanted to listen to, because everyone that I had presented to this particular project, which is in the green area, had become very excited by what it offered. And he didn't have that excitement. And yesterday, his degree of urgency was lacking, and it became apparent because he wasn't present during that presentation.
Yeah.
And I had to, in a way, reinsert that and go back through that or apply some urgency for him. But if he'd been present in that moment, we wouldn't have had the problem. And also, I mentioned just before we came and started recording, last night was the opening night of a play that I've written and directed. And my job was finished, really. I couldn't do any more. It was all down to the cast. And I sat in the middle of the audience because I wanted to feel the audience and see how they responded. This is the first time that I've seen it performed live. And I watched in the first few minutes, and I could see people moving around and just sort of doing things and moving their head. And I wanted to see if the play was going to be successful. And after 5 minutes, the movement stopped. They stopped talking. They weren't talking loudly, but they were looking, and they were connecting, because the actors did a great job. They were in their zone. They were performing. They lost themselves. Their nerves had gone away, and the audience went with them, and we were able to go on a journey. That thing of being in the moment, it not only helps yourself, but it helps the people around you, I think, and it can have many consequences. Facilitation is one of the things that you like to do. I know that you've got a master's in the psychology of change, which is also something very important, and something that I've seen with mergers and acquisitions. If somebody looking at this podcast today is interested in some of the things that you've done, how was best to get hold of you?
Well, thank you. I'm on LinkedIn, Thom with an H, Thom Dennis. And there's the website, which is serenityinleadership.com. And you'll find on Instagram, it's Serenity in Leadership. We're on Twitter, SI Leadership, and so on, and Facebook. And we've got a YouTube channel. And if you look for Serenity in Leadership, you'll find that we've got some. I mentioned Dean Carter. We've got a whole series of people, because I've been exploring what I've called leading responsibly with integrity and purpose. A series of interviews, and when something really happens in the news that really activates me, I do a quick 3-minute spiel on that. I haven't done them for a little while because I've been kind of really busy. Funny enough, facilitating mostly. So yeah, that's all the different ways. And I'd love to hear from people. I'd love to hear, if there are reactions to what I've said, or you agree or disagree, either way. And we've got, I published some articles in HR Director, HR Zone, HR Training, things like that. And again, feedback is great.
It is, yes. Positive or negative. And the bit of feedback that I would have for you is, I really resonated with all of the points that you made. And in fact, something that you said, it sort of highlighted a thought, but it helps create greater clarity for me. I recently hosted a meeting, and I've sort of got an approach when bringing together and having a meeting is about planning detail, but execute with flexibility. That's what I was reading from that. And that thought, as you were going through, that's helped me in some of my thinking. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for coming on to the Boss It podcast. I've enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that other people who have enjoyed it will reach out to you. So thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.
Let's keep in contact.
Yes, it's been fun talking with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed today, the Boss It podcast, then please reach out to me and let me know. If you haven't enjoyed it, then let me know as well. It's all useful feedback. But till next time, thank you very much.